This is Mr. Eugene, and today we're discussing something deeply uncomfortable, rarely acknowledged, and critically important: emotional manipulation and psychological abuse of men by women. This is heavy, this is vulnerable, and this is something that doesn't get discussed nearly enough because men are taught that acknowledging this reality makes us weak, makes us victims, makes us less than men. But here's the truth. Emotional manipulation of men by women is epidemic. It's destroying good men systematically. And the silence around it, the shame that prevents men from naming it, discussing it, seeking help for it, that silence is what allows the pattern to continue destroying man after man after man. And before we get into this, let me tell you why I'm willing to discuss this topic so openly and vulnerably despite the social cost of admitting I experienced this. Because years ago, before I understood relationship dynamics, before I had any framework for recognizing manipulation, before I developed the boundaries and self-respect I have now, I was in a relationship that systematically destroyed my sense of reality, my confidence, my self-worth, and my ability to trust my own perceptions. And I didn't even recognize it was happening until well after it ended. I thought I was the problem. I thought I was failing. I thought I was inadequate, because that's what she convinced me was true. And it was only years later, after developing understanding of psychological manipulation tactics, that I could look back and recognize I wasn't inadequate. I was being deliberately manipulated by someone who recognized my vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically. And the shame I felt, the shame that kept me silent, that made me hide what was happening, that convinced me admitting this reality made me weak, that shame was part of the manipulation. It kept me trapped. It prevented me from seeking help. It isolated me in the abuse. So I'm breaking that silence now. Not because I'm proud of how I handled it terribly because I didn't know what I was dealing with, but because other men need to hear that this is real, this is common, this isn't your fault, and there is a path out. Stay with me. Today we're examining the signs of emotional manipulation, why it happens, how it destroys men, and most importantly, how to break the cycle if you're in it and how to avoid it in the future. The story, when I didn't know what I was dealing with, let me paint you a picture from years ago, back when I was completely naive about female psychology and manipulation tactics. Back when I was, to be brutally honest, a nice guy. Too accommodating, too eager to please, no boundaries, no frame, just desperate for approval and terrified of conflict. I'm sitting in a restaurant, alone, waiting. I check my phone. She's now 50 minutes late. Not traffic late, not stuck at work late, just late. I send another message. Where are you? Are you okay? Blue check marks appear immediately. She's read it. No response. I'm sitting there, alone at a table obviously set for two. Other people glancing over with that look. You know the one. This poor guy got stood up look. I'm trying to look busy on my phone, trying not to feel the humiliation creeping up my neck. 70 minutes late, she walks in, not rushing, not apologetic, just casual, like she's arriving exactly on time. She sits down across from me with a smile. Hey babe, how's it going? And here's where it gets pathetic. Here's the part I'm embarrassed to admit, even years later. I was angry. For maybe the first time in that relationship, I was genuinely angry. Something in me finally said, this isn't okay. I said, and my voice was shaking because confrontation terrified me back then. I said, you're over an hour late. You read my messages. You didn't respond. What's going on? And watch what happened next. Because this is the pattern. This is the manipulation in action. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't acknowledge my experience at all. Instead, she immediately flipped it. Her face changed, hurt, shocked, wounded. Her voice shifted. I can't believe you're attacking me right now. Do you know what kind of day I've had? Do you have any idea what I've been dealing with? The trains were delayed. I've been stressed all day. And instead of being supportive, instead of being understanding, you're sitting here attacking me for something I couldn't control. She continued, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't listen to me. You don't care about what I'm going through. You just care about yourself and your feelings. I needed you to be understanding tonight, and you're just sitting here being angry and judgmental. I don't know if I can do this if you're going to be like this. And here's the devastating part. Here's what I'm ashamed to admit. I believed her. Within minutes, my anger, my completely justified frustration at being kept waiting over an hour without communication, that anger transformed into guilt, into shame, into feeling like I was the bad guy, like I was being unreasonable, like I was failing to be the understanding, supportive partner she needed. I apologized. I actually apologized for being upset that she was over an hour late without communication. I apologized for my tone. I apologized for not being more understanding about her stressful day. I spent the rest of the dinner trying to make her feel better, trying to prove I wasn't the inconsiderate person she just painted me as, and she let me. She accepted my apology with the magnanimous grace of someone who was wronged but was choosing to forgive, and I felt grateful grateful that she was giving me another chance despite my unreasonable behavior. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the pattern. This was the relationship. Every time I had a legitimate concern, every time I tried to establish a boundary, every time I expressed a need that wasn't being met, it got flipped. Somehow, I always ended up being the problem. I always ended up apologizing. I always ended up feeling ashamed for having needs or expectations or boundaries. And it destroyed me. Slowly, systematically. My self-confidence eroded to nothing. My ability to trust my own perceptions disappeared. I became a shell of myself, constantly walking on eggshells, constantly trying to manage her emotions, constantly terrified of triggering the next episode where I'd be made to feel like a terrible person for having basic human needs. The relationship ended when she cheated, and even then, even when the evidence was undeniable, I somehow found a way to blame myself, to question what I'd done wrong that drove her to it, to believe that if I'd just been better, more understanding, more supportive, more something, she wouldn't have needed to seek validation elsewhere. It was only years later, after I'd educated myself about manipulation tactics, after I'd developed actual boundaries and self-respect, after I'd learned to recognize gaslighting and emotional abuse, that I could look back and see the relationship clearly. See that I wasn't inadequate. I was being systematically manipulated by someone who recognized my desperate need for approval and my terror of conflict and exploited both ruthlessly. The signs you're being emotionally manipulated. Let me walk through the signs of emotional manipulation from the perspective of someone who lived through it. This isn't a comprehensive academic list. This is what I experienced, what I've seen other men experience, what you need to watch for. Sign 1. You feel guilty about everything, constant, pervasive guilt. Not just guilt about things you actually did wrong. Guilt about having needs. Guilt about having boundaries. Guilt about being frustrated or disappointed or hurt. Guilt about not being enough, not doing enough, not sacrificing enough. In healthy relationships, you feel guilty when you actually violate your values or hurt someone. In manipulative relationships, you feel guilty for existing as a human with needs and limits. If you find yourself constantly apologizing, constantly feeling like you're failing, constantly convinced that you're the problem in every conflict, that's not accurate self-assessment. That's manipulation embedding itself in your psyche. Sign 2. You don't trust your own perceptions. You stop trusting your own reality. You second-guess your own memories. You question your own interpretations of events. You can't trust your own feelings about what's happening because she's convinced you that your perceptions are wrong, your feelings are invalid, your concerns are unreasonable. This is gaslighting. And it's devastating because it destroys your internal compass. You can't navigate relationship when you can't trust your own sense of what's real and what's reasonable. In my case, I stopped trusting my anger. When I felt angry about being disrespected or disregarded, instead of trusting that anger as valid emotional response to legitimate violation, I questioned it. Am I being too sensitive? Am I being unfair? Am I missing something? Because she'd convinced me my anger was always wrong, always unreasonable, always me failing to be understanding enough. Sign 3. Your self-confidence is destroyed. Healthy relationships build confidence. You feel supported, valued, capable. Manipulative relationships systematically destroy confidence. You feel inadequate, unworthy, lucky that anyone tolerates you at all. This creates self-perpetuating cycle. Your destroyed confidence makes you believe you don't deserve better, so you accept treatment you shouldn't accept, which further destroys confidence, which makes you believe even more strongly that you don't deserve better. The spiral continues downward. I remember looking in mirror during that relationship and being disgusted with what I saw, not because I'd gained weight or aged or anything physical, but because I saw weakness, neediness, pathetic, desperate approval seeking. I hated who I'd become. And instead of recognizing the relationship was destroying me, I blamed myself for being weak, which is exactly what the manipulation wanted, me blaming myself instead of recognizing the abuse. Sign 4. You hide the reality from others. Shame keeps you silent. You don't want friends or family to know how bad it actually is because if you tell them, you'd have to acknowledge it to yourself. You'd have to face how unhealthy it is, so you hide it. You minimize it. You make excuses for her behavior. When friends would ask how things were going, I'd say, fine, or good enough, or make jokes to deflect. I wouldn't tell them about the constant criticism, the emotional volatility, the feeling of walking on eggshells, the manipulation of every conflict, because telling them would mean admitting to myself how bad it was. And when friends did try to tell me the relationship seemed unhealthy, I'd get defensive. I'd make excuses. I'd explain why they didn't understand, because accepting their perspective would mean accepting that I was allowing myself to be treated poorly, and I wasn't ready to face that. Sign 5, you crave her approval and validation. You become addicted to the moments when she approves of you, validates you, shows you affection. Those moments feel like winning, like finally being enough, like proof that you matter. This is intermittent reinforcement. the same psychological mechanism that makes gambling addictive. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. The unpredictability creates compulsion to keep playing. In healthy relationships, approval and affection are consistent baseline. In manipulative relationships, they're unpredictable rewards that you're constantly working to earn through perfect behavior and total sacrifice of your needs. I became completely dependent on her validation. When she was warm and affectionate, I felt high. Like I'd cracked the code, like I'd finally figured out how to be good enough. When she was cold and critical, I felt worthless, and I'd spend days, sometimes weeks, trying to figure out what I did wrong and how to get back to the moments when she approved of me. That addiction to her approval, that desperate need for her validation, kept me trapped far longer than I should have stayed. Sign 6. You have no boundaries, you can't say no. You can't assert your needs, you can't push back on unreasonable demands. You're terrified of upsetting her because upsetting her means triggering the manipulation cycle where you'll end up apologizing and feeling guilty for having boundaries in the first place. So you sacrifice everything. Your time, your money, your energy, your friends, your hobbies, your values. Everything becomes negotiable if it means keeping peace, avoiding conflict, preventing her from being upset. I had no boundaries in that relationship. None. She could demand anything and I'd comply. She could violate any reasonable expectation and I'd accept it. She could disrespect me in front of others and I'd pretend it was fine. Because asserting a boundary, pushing back, saying no, or that's not acceptable, those actions would trigger conflict. And I was too weak, too desperate, too terrified of conflict to defend myself. Why this happens? Your role in the dynamic. Now here's the hard part. The part that requires honesty about your own contribution to these dynamics. Because while she's executing manipulation tactics, you're enabling them. You're co-creating this dynamic through your own unaddressed weaknesses and unhealed wounds. I'm not saying this is your fault. I'm saying you have power in the situation that you're not recognizing. And reclaiming that power requires examining why you accepted this treatment. Reason 1. Low self-worth and poor boundaries, you accept the love you think you deserve. If you believe deep down that you're not valuable, that you don't deserve respect, that you should be grateful anyone tolerates you, you'll accept treatment that reflects that belief. I had terrible self-worth before that relationship. I believed I was fundamentally unlovable, that women were doing me a favor by being with me, that I needed to earn affection through perfect performance. So when she treated me poorly, it aligned with my existing belief about my worth. I accepted it because it felt consistent with who I believed I was. And I had no boundaries because boundaries require believing you deserve respect. If you don't believe that, you can't defend it. Reason 2. Replaying familiar patterns. Often, we unconsciously seek out relationship dynamics that feel familiar, even if those dynamics were painful. If your childhood involved relationships where your needs weren't valued, where your boundaries weren't respected, where love was conditional on perfect behavior, that dynamic feels familiar in adulthood. And familiar feels safe even when familiar is destructive, because unfamiliar is scary even when unfamiliar would be healthier. Looking back, that relationship had eerie similarities to my relationship with my mother growing up. The emotional volatility, the unpredictable approval, the sense that I was always walking on eggshells, always trying to manage her emotions, always responsible for her happiness. I was unconsciously recreating a dynamic I knew, even though that dynamic was painful. Reason 3. Addiction to the emotional intensity. Here's the uncomfortable truth I had to face. Part of me was getting something from the dysfunction. Part of me was addicted to the emotional roller coaster. The highs, when she was affectionate, when she validated me, especially when she wanted me sexually, those highs felt intoxicating. Like I'd finally won, like I finally mattered. The dopamine hit was enormous. And the lows, when she was cold, critical, withholding, those lows made the highs feel even better by contrast. The relief when she finally showed affection after days of coldness was like a drug. I was addicted to the emotional intensity of the dysfunction. Healthy, stable relationships felt boring by comparison because I'd been conditioned to associate emotional volatility with passion, with being alive, with love itself. This addiction kept me trapped because walking away meant withdrawing from the drug, meant accepting that stable, healthy relationships wouldn't give me those intense highs. And part of me wasn't ready to give up the addiction even though it was destroying me. Breaking the cycle, how to get out and stay out. So how do you break this pattern? How do you get out if you're in it? How do you prevent it from happening again? Let me give you the path forward based on what worked for me and what I've seen work for other men. Step 1. Reject the victim identity first. And most important, you are not a victim. Victim identity feels comforting because it absolves you of responsibility, but it also strips you of power. As long as you're a victim, you're helpless. As long as she's the perpetrator inflicting this on you, you can't change anything. The truth is harder but more empowering. You co-created this dynamic. There are parts of your psychology, your low self-worth, your poor boundaries, your unhealed wounds, your addiction to validation, that invited this treatment and allowed it to continue. Recognizing your role doesn't mean accepting blame. It means reclaiming power. You participated in creating this dynamic, which means you have power to change it. When you catch yourself slipping into victim mentality, she's doing this to me, stop. Reframe, I'm accepting this treatment. What am I going to do about? What power do I have here? Step 2, seek help from safe people you need to break the silence. The shame keeping you quiet is part of the manipulation. It isolates you in the abuse. It prevents you from getting perspective. It keeps you trapped in dynamics you can't see clearly because you're inside them. Find safe people, friends, family, therapists, mentors, who you can tell the truth to, not people who'll just validate you and tell you what you want to hear. People who care about you enough to tell you hard truths. People who'll give you honest feedback about what they're observing. I know the shame is powerful. I know admitting this feels like admitting you're weak or pathetic or less than a man. But that shame is lying to you. Emotional manipulation happens to strong men, successful men, intelligent men. It's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of unprocessed pain that makes you vulnerable to specific tactics. And sharing it with safe people diffuses the shame, brings it into light, gives you perspective from outside the manipulation bubble, provides support as you navigate getting out. Step 3. Join a brotherhood of honest men. You need men around you who aren't afraid to call you on your bullshit, who'll tell you when you're making excuses, who'll challenge you when you're accepting treatment you shouldn't accept, who'll support you while also refusing to enable your victim mentality or your addiction to dysfunction. Yes, men are not your friends. Men who won't tell you hard truths because they don't want to upset you. They're not helping you. You need men who care about you enough to risk the friendship to tell you what you need to hear. Find a men's group, a brotherhood, a circle of men committed to growth and honesty, men who've done their own work, men who understand that masculine strength includes emotional intelligence and vulnerability. Men who can hold space for your pain while also challenging you to take responsibility for your patterns. Step 4. Build your core identity, VIP. One of the reasons manipulation works is weak sense of self. When you don't have strong values, identity, and purpose. When you're not grounded in who you are, independent of relationships, you become malleable. You adapt to whoever you're with. You lose yourself in relationship because there's no solid self to maintain. Build your VIP, values, identity, purpose. Values. What do you stand for? What matters to you? What are you unwilling to compromise? Get clear on your values and live by them consistently. This creates internal integrity that makes you resistant to manipulation. Identity. Who are you independent of relationship? What defines you beyond being someone's partner? Develop identity that exists whether you're in relationship or not. Hobbies, skills, communities, friendships, pursuits that are yours. Purpose. What are you building? What contribution are you making? What mission drives you beyond relationship and sex? Men with purpose are harder to manipulate because they have something they value more than any individual relationship. When you have strong, very important person, you become a mountain. You're not easily swayed. You don't lose yourself in relationships. You maintain frame. You can walk away from dynamics that don't serve you because you have identity and purpose that transcends any single relationship. Step 5. Establish and defend boundaries. Get crystal clear on what you will and will not accept. What behaviors are deal breakers? What treatment is unacceptable? What needs are non-negotiable? Then defend those boundaries even when it's uncomfortable, even when it creates conflict, even when it risks the relationship. Most men in these dynamics are too nice, too accommodating, too terrified of being seen as mean or selfish or difficult. So they accept treatment they shouldn't accept because asserting boundaries feels wrong. You need to become comfortable with the idea that you're not responsible for managing everyone's emotions, that saying no is not cruelty, that defending your boundaries, even if it upsets her, is not you being a bad person. Practice being what Jordan Peterson calls a monster under control. Develop your capacity for assertiveness, for saying no, for pushing back, for walking away. Not so you become abusive yourself, but so you have teeth when necessary. So you can defend yourself. Nice guys who can't access anger, can't assert boundaries, can't risk conflict, they get eaten alive in these dynamics. You need to develop the capacity to be dangerous so that you can choose to be harmless from a position of strength, not weakness. Step 6. Recognize manipulation tactics. Educate yourself on common manipulation tactics so you can recognize them when they're being deployed. Gaslighting, making you doubt your own perceptions and memories. That didn't happen. You're being too sensitive. You're remembering it wrong. Darvo, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. She denies wrongdoing, attacks you for bringing it up, and positions herself as the victim of your unreasonable reaction, guilt tripping, making you feel guilty for having needs, boundaries, or concerns, After everything I do for you, this is how you treat me? Silent treatment, withdrawing affection and communication as punishment for not complying with her wishes. Triangulation, bringing third parties into the conflict to make you feel like everyone agrees you're wrong. Moving goalposts, changing expectations so you can never quite meet them. Ensuring you're always falling short. When you can name the tactic being used, it loses power. You can see it as manipulation technique rather than legitimate response to your inadequacy. Step 7. Walk away. If nothing changes, if you've established boundaries, if you've communicated your needs, if you've given her opportunity to change the dynamic and nothing improves, walk away. Don't stay out of guilt. Don't stay because you're afraid to be alone. Don't stay because you've invested time or because you believe you can fix her or because you're addicted to the intensity. Walking away from manipulative relationship is not failure. It's self-respect. It's recognizing that you deserve better. It's choosing your well-being over dysfunction. And if she escalates to physical violence, throwing things, hitting you, any physical aggression, you leave immediately. You restrain if necessary to prevent harm, but you do not retaliate physically. You document. You leave. You end it. Physical abuse is non-negotiable deal breaker. The path forward. Here's what I want you to understand. If you're in this situation now, or if you've been in it before, this is not a reflection of your worth. You're not weak for experiencing this. You're not pathetic for accepting it. You were vulnerable in ways you didn't understand, and someone exploited that vulnerability. But you do have responsibility for your healing, for addressing the wounds that made you vulnerable, for building the strength and boundaries that prevent it from happening again, for doing the work so you can recognize manipulation early and walk away before it destroys you. I'm years removed from that relationship now. And the work I did afterward, building self-worth, establishing boundaries, developing emotional intelligence, learning to recognize manipulation, joining men's groups, building strong identity independent of relationships, that work transformed me. I'm no longer the needy, approval-seeking, boundaryless man I was. I'm no longer vulnerable to those tactics because I've addressed the wounds that made me vulnerable. I can recognize manipulation attempts immediately and shut them down or walk away. And that's available to you too. The shame, the weakness, the confusion, those aren't permanent. They're products of the manipulation and your own unhealed wounds. Both can be addressed. Both can be healed. Final thoughts. Let me tell you why I shared my story despite the shame it brings up. Despite how embarrassing it is to admit I was that weak, that manipulable, that desperate for approval. Because other men need to hear it, need to know that this happens to good men. That experiencing this doesn't make you less than, that there's a path out. The silence around male emotional abuse is killing men. Men are suffering in isolation because they're too ashamed to admit they're being manipulated by women, too afraid of being seen as weak, too convinced that admitting this reality means accepting their failures as men. That silence needs to break. We need to talk about this openly. We need to create space for men to acknowledge when they're in these dynamics and seek help without shame. We need to educate men on manipulation tactics so they can recognize them early. We need to build communities of men who support each other through this without judgment. This channel exists because I got tired of watching men suffer in silence through dynamics they don't understand. I got tired of men blaming themselves for treatment that was actually manipulation. I got tired of men being ashamed of experiences that are common and survivable. So if this resonated, if you've experienced this, if you're experiencing it now, drop a comment. Share your story. Let other men know they're not alone, that you survived it, that there's a path forward. Break the silence that keeps men trapped. Subscribe for more truth about relationship dynamics that destroy men silently, because this channel will never shame you for acknowledging you've been manipulated. We'll never tell you that experiencing this makes you weak. We'll never ask you to suffer in silence to protect your masculine image. You're not a victim. You're a man who experienced something painful and is choosing to heal from it. That's strength, not weakness. Act accordingly.